this is Carrie O'Donnell from Tarot Soul Writer, and I'd like to welcome back Danny Doucette from A Healing Being, or actually I should say A Healing Gen X Being. So we are going to continue that conversation today of why does Gen X need to heal? But just to start out, how are things going, Danny? Like what's up in your world of A Healing Gen X Being? Tell us a little bit also about what's going on astrologically out there.
Okay, well, so what's going on? Thank you, Carrie. First of all, and thank you for having me back. I really have been having a lot of fun with our emailing back and forth and laughing and being frustrated sometimes at what the heck we're trying to do here, because it's not always easy.
No.
I am like, for some reason, nervous today. When we did this the first time, I was just like so set. I was so real. I was so like myself, but I'm very nervous today. So I'm gonna just like.
But that's like what I was feeling, like the energy is a little different.
Yeah,
today.
It's so I'm gonna first just like let my hand like shake it until it slows down to kind of break the ice. Break the ice. Oh, here we are. All right, we're talking about Generation X. So I so my YouTube channel is called A Healing Gen X Being. My website is called A Healing Being. It's too long to have the Gen X in there, but I do focus most of my healing work on working with Gen Xers. You asked about astrology. So I thought we can set the stage. I'm going to look on my phone here and refer to my little app so I can like cheat. But in my meditation practice, my primary mode of doing healing work with people is by accompanying them on meditation journeys, which is why I have a rattle, for example, and as we will see later on, we'll use a drum. But when I'm preparing for a healing journey with someone, I refer usually both to what's going on astrologically, and also I use the tarot, or I sometimes use other oracle cards, which for me, the cards are more individual oriented, and then the astrology is collective. So later on in our conversation, I think we can talk more about individual versus collective with respect to what the heck is up with Generation X. But collectively, right? Astrologically, first I'll say, for people out there who are not necessarily into astrology or have worked with it very much, think about this. We accept, like scientifically, we accept that the sun in the sky is like putting off these like massive solar bursts, and sometimes you'll read in science journals how there's going to be a solar flare. And so scientifically we understand that there's this energy that's flowing from the sun through space, through the earth, through our bodies, through the cells in our bodies, right?
Right.
We don't see it, we don't hear it, but we say, oh, well, the scientists are telling us, oh yeah, so it's happening. So astrology is really about like taking a more expansive view of that, even, and understanding that we are circling that sun with all these other planets, right? And all those planets, just like the sun and just like the cells in our body, put off energy. So we're basically living in this astrological weather,
right?
That's always going on around us. And so we can use that as, just like I'm looking out the sky and it's cloudy and drizzly, when you look out the sky and see with your eyes the drizzles and the rain, that can activate certain emotions or thoughts or perspectives. So if you can consider with your brain what's happening in the planets around us, we can use that as well to inform our lives. Okay, so that's my little mini lesson on astrology.
I like the metaphor though, with the weather. That like really works for me.
Great. So I was excited to do this today with you because as we speak,
yeah, this is a big day.
At this moment, okay, we are experiencing a full moon. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And now The full moon means that the moon is opposing the sun. Okay, every time there's a full moon, the moon is opposing the sun. So the energies of those two bodies are in not conflict,
It's
tension.
not conflict, right?
It's tension. It's tension.
Okay.
It's tension, right? And so from that tension, you can either derive negative outcomes or you can actually use it for positive means. So the sun, which represents our ego and our sort of like self-centric aspect of ourselves, is opposing the moon, which represents our emotions and our intuitive reality, right?
Yeah, stuff underneath.
In our dream set, our dream self. So those are opposing. So there's tension between just like our sense of self and I want to do what I want to say and I want to and our just like our inner aspect, our emotional, our intuitive body. That's intention today. So maybe, Gary, when you said at the beginning, I feel weird, I feel something,
it's
and
a different kind of feeling than it was the last time we came on.
Yeah. And I'm like a little bit nervous. There's like that nervous, like a nervous tension between those two things. Right. And as it happens, when this is happening, this full moon, this particular one, the moon is hanging out in the constellation Scorpio. So Scorpio is the 8th house of the zodiac, and Scorpio is associated actually with sexuality, which is not really the topic of our call today necessarily, but sexuality and also death and rebirth. Okay, so that's what Scorpio is about. So the moon in particular, our emotional intuitive self, is being influenced and rained upon by Scorpio, which is highlighting death and rebirth. What do we have to let go of? What do we have to like relinquish?
Yep.
At like an intuitive, like emotional, like inner level to be able to move forward effectively. So those are the big ones that's going on today. I mean, Venus is also, I was telling you before we got out, Venus is squaring with who? Venus is squaring with Neptune. So Venus, which represents it's a personal planet, similar to the sun, I'm going to say, because Venus represents, among other things, like our values.
Right.
And Pluto, again, Pluto is the Scorpio planet. Okay, so just to make that connection, okay? Right. All right, so Venus and the sun are very much about like me here and now, in the moment, what I need, my values, myself, my expression. And Scorpio is about like that sort of like that, like death throes. And Neptune is also about our dreamlike self as well. So there's lots of tension between like ego, expression, here and now, concrete, and that inside inner work that we need to do. So that's what's informing the space today, Gary.
Yeah, and it's really big. I just wanted to say hi to Ruth. She showed up in the chat. Hi, Ruth. Hey. And I was going to say, like, we see that in so many aspects. Like, I'm feeling it personally. I'm feeling that idea of the death throes and working on releasing things in my own life. But we're also seeing it collectively just in our politics right now, in the world. There are certain things that I feel are in the death throes in some ways, in just the way we live as human beings right now. So it's a really interesting day, I think. And that kind of leads to what we really need to talk about today, which is, why does Gen X need to heal? And I said, all right, after our last show, I was like, maybe we're a little bit all over the place. I want to put some things down, like some concrete, because I could hear, like I told you, because most of my viewers are not in my generation. So I think they're more, according to my analytics on YouTube, there'd be more boomers watching me than Gen Xers. Although there are some Gen Xers that
Please understand us.
And I'm like, this is kind of like, I have like this like sense, like I'm the kid because my mother's a boomer. And I'd be like, yeah, exactly. Like, please understand me. Like, but at the same time, I could hear like their voices saying, bunch of whiners, like, what's wrong with them? Everybody has something. And that's something I wanted to clarify today. But then you came at, you had an interesting post on your channel, and I would love you to start with that because it kind of deals with perfectly everything that Gen Xers kind of emulate and why we need to heal.
Right. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah. So, and just to going back to the briefly to the collective and the individual again, like, what you and I have been trying to grapple with is talk about, as you just alluded to, like, what does Generation X as a cohort have in common, in terms of our life experiences or what was happening around us, and how those they're trends, right? Generally influenced us, just like they influenced boomers, just like they influenced millennials at different points in time.
Yeah.
Right. So all of us, I mean, we're all individual human beings. We have our own stuff. We have our own lived experiences and different class and race and ethnicity and gender identity.
Everything.
We're trying to, that's why it's hard, Carrie, because we're trying here in this space to like refine our perspective and around this like collective healing aspect, right? So that's hard. So I have a relatively new YouTube channel, which, if anyone's listening, help me reach more people. And subscribe.
Put it down below and subscribe to Dan's channel. It's awesome.
So literally yesterday, I just posted a new intro video on the channel describing the purpose of my channel, a healing Gen X being. And I talk about in the intro video what you and I have been playing with, this idea of collective woundedness.
Right.
Okay. Which sounds pretty whiny.
It does.
Sounds pretty whiny, right? But I want you to say that it's pretty whiny, but not only to a boomer, maybe, pardon us, boomer parents, but also I got a comment from a fellow Gen Xer.
Yeah.
That I'm going to read to you all. And this is basically illustrating what we'll talk about. So this lovely human being, from her own lived experience, posted the following. She said to me, "We have collective wounds." Put the question in the chat. What am I seeing from Sharon?
Oh, so Sharon, I think, is telling if you have questions, right? Post them in the chat, and that way we can address them on this topic.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. All right. Reset. So this lovely person took time out of her day, even though she didn't understand and didn't agree with what I was saying in my video, but she took energy and time to actually put a thoughtful comment, I'm going to say, right? So here's what she said. "We have collective wounds. We're the same age, and that makes no sense. We must have grown up in entirely different surroundings. Heading towards 60, I don't consider it one way or the other," meaning I don't consider collective woundedness one way or the other. "I'm just an old woman now, so what?" I love that, by the way. Heading towards 60, I'm just an old woman now, so what? So what? Carrie, let's talk about so what in a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
And she goes on to say, "I'm not sure of anything that happened to Gen X collectively that wounded us," which is what we'll talk about more. Yeah. "Every Gen Xer I know is tough as nails." I want to repeat that.
Yes, it's a very important one.
She says, in response to not getting what I'm saying about like we have something in common around woundedness, she says, "Every Gen Xer I know is tough as nails and doesn't have time to think about being wounded some other decade ago." You really, now this is funny. She ends with this one. "You really sound like you were born sometime around 1995.
Which would be millennial, I believe. Yeah. The end of the millennial generation.
Yeah.
Which goes along with something I want to talk about, which is some of the differences before we get into how Gen X is wounded collectively, because I mean, she hits right on with that tough as nails comment. Right. This is what Gen Xers do.
Right.
They put on, "I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to deal with it. Suck it up, buttercup."
Yeah.
Like we've been there. We've been there. Like just plod through.
Right.
That's who we are. And you go on Twitter and they're like, "Leave us alone. We're going to our cave. We don't really want to engage with any of you people."
Right.
It's so, her response is so typical Gen X.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's everything that we've been talking about.
Yep.
And kind of going back to some of the other groups or generations on the planet right now, we could go to the silent generation and we could say collectively they had wounds. I mean, right now they're from 78 to 95 years old. Unfortunately, COVID took a huge bite out of that generation, unfortunately. But they had to grow up during the Great Depression. And then, especially the elder of that generation, they may have even fought in World War II.
Right.
And they were the builders. They had to come back and deal with all of that. And they basically were the ones to say, let's build a new society. Let's be thrifty. Let's focus. And they built families and they built new communities and they built new cities in some cases, depending on where the generation was.
Right.
And then you had like the boomers, and boomers had their own scars. I think in particular, I mean, this is the generation of the Cold War.
Right.
My mother will still talk about like the duck and roll kind of things they had to go through, and how she said, I used to be a little kid in the 50s, looking out my window, thinking that the bomb is going to go off at any day.
Right.
Like that left some scars. They have the whole civil rights movement.
Right.
So depending on what race you were, that was a huge shakeup.
Right.
Plus they had Vietnam. Scars of Vietnam and guilt over that war followed that generation through the swing back to conservatism in the 80s. And then, the 90s with Bill Clinton, and did he inhale and wrestling with drug use as they came of power. But these two generations, what we saw was kind of a growing up and facing those issues one way or another, publicly, collectively. They were facing them and kind of figuring it all out. Like, what did that all mean? What was our reaction from when we were younger? Millennials, I feel like, are going to be scarred in a different way, because I think they were most affected by 9/11. These were the kids who started to fight in the long wars in Afghanistan and beyond. And they have dealt with severe economic issues. But I don't know if they're at the age yet. They're between 26 and 42, where they're still just wrestling with the wounds. Like, I don't think they're in that place where they can move out of the wounds. And Gen Z is still trying to figure it out. So that kind of leads to us. And, what are our wounds? It's interesting because we're between that 43 and 58 years old. And we had touched on this in the last video. We're right in that age of maturity. We're not just, I'm a 60, I'm an old lady, so what? But we're also at that point where we do have to look at the wounds that we had from our childhood or collectively in order to move on toward our legacy. What is it that we're going to give back to the world collectively? Like silent generation, the builders, and, boomers, social change. What is it that Gen X has? What is it that we can heal so we can pass on something to the next generations who will struggle with their own wounds? And I wanted to kind of add that beginning because I didn't want to negate what other generations have gone through, or the fact, but what they've done successfully is they've processed through those things. At least the older of the generations, the ones behind us are just not there yet. But how can we do that collectively with our generation? And I think the first thing is to actually say we do have wounds, which that woman couldn't see yet. She can't see it.
Right. And that's why I think that, like, that receiving that kind of a message for me, of course, there's the social media and you want things to be positive. And again, like Gen X here, I want to be seen. I want to be recognized because I always feel invisible, blah, blah, whine. Right. So of course, like on the one hand, to receive that, and posted on my YouTube as a comment, like, oh crap, that's gonna ruin my rep or whatever. But any, like, getting that response tells me that, the video that I posted, the first 2 seconds, I say, Gen Xer, don't scroll past this. Hold on a second. Like a little bit desperate there. But so I got this person to stop and read. And even if today, as she's going about her business, to the extent she even like thinks about this anymore, ever again, she might be thinking, that person's whacked, like totally whacked, like
Yeah.
wasting my time. But something's stirring, and that brings me back to this like full moon in Scorpio. So even if you're hearing me right now and you're like, I don't really vibe with these people, I don't really know what they're talking about, but you're here and something's
Yeah.
stirring, right? And so that's that full moon energy. I think that what you were just saying that got my attention was being mindful of what time of life sort of chronologically. Okay,
Right.
I know, and again, I know we're all different individually, and we all grow up. Some of us grow and mature at different rates and whatnot. But we also know that like there's general like psychological, frameworks that sort of
Yeah.
like guide us in our understanding of a human development.
Human development.
Right,
Yes.
right. So, I mean, I can just speak from my own experience. I mean, I know that it was around the time that I was in my early 40s that I would say now I actually first started to know myself.
I would
Right? Like
agree with
for me,
myself as well.
right, right.
Yeah.
It was not in my 20s, for God's sakes, clueless, pardon me.
Yeah.
30s, you're still very busy and climbing and scratching and scraping and proving and all that kind of stuff. It's really in your early 40s as a generality
Yes.
that something starts to shift and maybe settle, if we're lucky and we're aware of it, right? And it takes a
Yes.
while to do. And so, I mean, for me, again, that's why I think I'm excited about doing this work now, and you're doing this work with your own healing practice of focusing on this cohort, because I mean, I love the idea of aging. I'm not afraid to age. I
Me too.
love the idea of being of being like a really caring, solid, positive elder person on the earth. If I get to
Mhm.
that stage, that life, that age. But I think we have some stuff to fix before we can be those responsible, caring elders that leave something to the younger generations that come up after us that's
Right.
worthy of our time on this planet. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot, because I had written down that there's a lot we can add because of our experiences growing up. I mean, we are the last generation that grew up like in childhood without computers.
Right.
We're like the last generation. So we had one foot in the old world and another foot in the new one. We didn't grow up with the computers all there, but we grew up alongside the technology. And that gave us a certain skill set of like when we talk about perseverance, and some of it was out of panic, because I always remember when I was younger, like this is really hard for me if I had to learn computer programming in like a second, or I had to figure things out for myself, because if I didn't, I couldn't keep up in the job market, and
Right.
I was young and I had to do that. I couldn't be an older person who said, well, I was going to retire in a few years anyway, or I was in a seat of power to say, we'll give it to the young people to do it. I was the young person. So you had to kind of keep moving. And I kind of feel like there are certain attributes there that are needed. I think for some younger people, there is a sense of grounding. Like that woman said, she's tough as nails, but there is something to that.
Yeah.
There was a toughness that we had to endure in order to grow up in that frame of very rapid change in
Right.
all aspects.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So the rapid change. All right. So Carrie, let's just name it. Let's just name it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna name it. All right.
there we go.
And you and I have grappled with this a little bit.
It's probably written on my paper right now what you're
Okay.
going to name.
So if we talk about when I am talking about myself, at least the shared woundedness, and again, we're not talking about literally what happened necessarily in our individual day-to-day lives. Okay.
Right.
I'm going to say the big word that for me, the big word, I think one of the wounds of Gen X is abandonment.
I
Okay,
put it as the main issue.
Okay, I do too.
Like it almost seemed like all the other issues that I brainstormed
Me too.
went around like abandonment would be in the circle, and then
Right.
all the other things are
Right.
off of that
Right.
hole.
Because I also have like I sometimes I said there's alienation, there's disillusionment.
Yeah.
Right. That there's like promises broken. But you're right. Like I if I do these little like thought doodles or whatever you call
Yeah.
those, the abandonment's in the center. Now again, so Carrie, let's just say it out loud because you and I have talked about this offline. Okay, we're not blaming our parents.
No, it's not
It's
their
not
fault.
about that. It's
No.
not about that. So let's talk about this. All right. So I'll
Yeah.
start. So the way I see this is when if I was born in 1967, you were 66.
66.
Right. Okay. So even when we couldn't speak. Okay. If
Mhm.
we think about the events happening in the world and the changes happening in the world, I mean, in 1968, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy being assassinated
Right.
in the United States, when we were just toddlers,
Mhm.
we're walking around, and what were the adults talking about? We may not have even like understood it, but we were living in the soup of the shock and the loss that the United States experienced collectively as a result of, for example, those events. As an example,
And can I just add one?
sure,
Because I remember when I was in kindergarten, or I was getting to that kindergarten stage, and that was around the time Watergate was
right,
happening. I think with Nixon, I didn't understand any of that, but I had a cute story because when you're in kindergarten, you learn how to do the Pledge of Allegiance,
right,
and because I knew our president was Richard Nixon, I had heard adults say that, so I thought it was for Richard Stans when I did the Pledge of Allegiance when I was
right,
5 years old. And my mother had to correct me. So I knew that even though I didn't understand any of that, I was already attuned to what was around me. Somehow I heard what the president's name was. I didn't
right,
understand anything, but
right.
obviously it was in the background and I was absorbing it.
Yeah. So other like aspects of abandonment, again, like thinking back to our young youth, our youngest youth. I mean, this was the time. So a positive thing that happened, for example, women's rights.
Yeah,
But this is complicated, though. This is complicated. So a positive development in history and society. Women beginning. I mean, it's still happening. It's not done, but beginning to get their due. Okay.
mhm,
Um, so that caused changes that, I mean, we talked about like divorce rates. We talked about the latchkey kids because both the
yeah,
parents were working. Now that was as a result of certain things that we can view as positive happening in the world. But when I say abandonment, I mean like there were things that were crumbling. There were traditions.
right.
There was a sense of how things have always been that were crumbling
And can
underneath.
I just add to the women thing?
Yeah,
Because there were the women who went to work because they wanted to.
right,
And then there were people like my mother who
mm,
went to work because she had to.
right, right,
Because we saw like this crumbling of, like you said, the gas crisis
right,
and the recession in the 70s,
right,
where the economy, the factories are now starting to leave. All of that is starting to happen in that time period. And my mother will always say, do you remember the commercial like I I can bring home the bacon, fry it up
and
in a
up in a
pan,
pan.
and never, never forget you're a man. My mother used to be like, I hate that commercial.
Right,
Like she would like go ballistic, like steam coming out of her ears because here she was, the mother of 4 kids.
right,
My father's working. She is, there's no daycare, there's no nothing. We had to
right,
come home on our own. She's working, and we're all trying to figure it out. And like, so just to kind of add to that, because there were so many dynamics there as far as how the family structures were changing and how people felt about it.
right, 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 right. So yeah, so I mean, all of these sort of like social transformations happening, and some of them again had positive aspects to where things were heading. It was still like massive wholesale change
Right.
happening around us while we were small, and of course the practical result of it. Again, this is not for every individual, but on the whole, the common thing we talk about is, coming home from school to an empty house because everyone was working, we're on our own. There's positive things to growing up that way. So, I mean, not trying to whine, right? Like
Right.
being self-reliant, self-sufficient. I'm grateful that I have
I'm
that.
going to add another small story. First grade, my mother dropped, I guess she had to go somewhere. She dropped off a lunch for me, but I didn't understand
Yeah,
when the teacher gave it to me that was a lunch. It wasn't explained to me. So I walked home because back
right,
then we walked home for lunch. This was, I know it's crazy, but they didn't have a cafeteria. It was a neighborhood school. So I walked home for lunch. No one's home. I let myself in. I'm 6 years old.
Yeah.
I'm like, Mom, oh, she's not here. Am I worried? No. Made myself a sandwich, got a little stepping stool, made myself a sandwich, walked out, shut the door, and went back to school.
Yeah.
Like, how many 6-year-olds can do that now?
I have one sibling who is 10 years younger than I am. And when I was 10 years old, 11 years old, it wasn't for a long amount patches of time, but I was at home alone, 10, 11, babysitting for a little while, an hour or two, sometimes 3, my infant sister, changing her diaper. Okay, 10, 11 years old. All right. I mean, just think now. And I can, if it was like the prior generations, again, generally speaking, at that time there was more of the traditional like extended family structure, right? So that even if a parent had to be away busy doing something, there was generally speaking that extended family to fill in the gaps, right? And then, of course, after people younger than we are, Carrie, like we all know, you would not have a 10-year-old child taking care of a baby for an hour, even, right? No. So that's that again, that latchkey, that's that abandonment. And again, it's an imprint. It's an imprint inside.
And you know what? Because when we're there, and I just told the story like that woman who wrote the message. I was tough as nails. I'm a 6-year-old, made my own sandwich. But here's the thing. It's after the fact. It's after you get out of the experience. And then you think of, there might have been moments I was scared and I was told myself I shouldn't be scared. I can think of all these little moments of being alone and just saying, well, I did kind of feel alone. I did kind of feel like, why isn't anyone helping me? And not really acknowledging it, because that would hurt adults' feelings or people that I loved. And again, I'm not trying to blame people. It was the way it was. Everybody was struggling,
I feel like
we didn't acknowledge it.
So I think that like as we work towards this, and I think in a few minutes we're going to do some cards and some meditation in maybe 10 minutes or so. I think it's also important for us to be explicit that you and I have never used the word trauma.
No, it was
because that's not what we are talking about here, right? We are energy healers. We are spiritual healers and energy healers. That's why we're talking about that common, shared, energetic, like soul level imprints, right? Made upon us by these collective trends happening in our world while we were young human beings, right? And how that shows up for us is very specific and individual, of course.
Yes.
Absolutely. Right. But for those of us like you and me, Carrie, who are very like empathetically, just like on fire, even this lovely woman who disagreed with me on my YouTube, this is going to sound like wrong in some ways, but I can feel her woundedness.
Yeah.
I can see and feel that woundedness. It is not my place to mess with that individual's experience, but we see it, right? And so I think we're here to name it, and to the extent that there's folks out there who can identify the value in that and the use and the practical usefulness in that, is that we can grow into those beautiful elders that we are destined to become, right?
Right.
And leave the legacy that the best possible legacy behind that we can leave, right? That's why we're here, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, because it just kind of came across like, even if you were a child who grew up with your parents never leaving your side, there were other ways I think you could have experienced this collective abandonment. Just the fact that our generation was smaller, we were called the baby bust. After the baby boom, there weren't many babies born in our time compared to other generations. And then the sense that we got lost when the millennials came of age, and we were like, well, what about me? Just at the time we were supposed to be, like you said, promises that were not kept. We thought if we followed the rules, and then we found out that the rules were all different now. And then you had this new generation that seemed to be getting more attention to you because you're like the middle child, right? Collectively. So there are other ways you could have experienced a sense or the whole of abandonment without literally being abandoned. You know, like it's complicated. It's very complex.
Right. I think, I mean, going back to this person's, what did she say? Trying to find a note. The tough as nails. I can't find it. Sorry, I'm losing my mind right now. I lost my train of thought, Carrie. I was having a brilliant stroke of luck right then, and I lost it. Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. We're practical. Okay, so our generation is known for being practical, and this conversation is a practical conversation. This is not a woo-woo baloney conversation. What you and I are saying is we're trying to identify how, you know, those wound imprints inside of us that are affecting how we show up every single day in our relationships, in our work relationships, in our family relationships, so we can just be better people in the world. That's, I mean, what's more practical than that? I don't know what is.
And that is the legacy, is we have to look at our stuff and then in many cases let it go, which really fits with that Scorpio situation there astrologically, just to let it go, to end it, but to also understand what we've gained from that experience collectively and what we can pass on to younger people. And I'm thinking right now, this would be a good time for me to do a tarot reading. I am going to ask the question, and I'm hoping you can riff off of that with your meditation. I know. Whoops. I know. He's put on the hat. Get it ready.
I have to have my hat on. This is my hat from Gary Knits, Gary Rides. See? Okay.
I love it. Thanks for making him a hat, Gary. I'm going to ask the question, how does Gen X need to heal? Because I know our show is like why, and I think we've addressed a lot of the why.
We're beating a horse here.
Yeah. And now I would like to ask Spirit, how? What is it that needs to come into our knowing of how Gen X needs to heal? So let's just take a look. All right, so I'm going to kind of do this live here, one card at a time. So the first thing I'm getting is the Four of Cups reverse. So this is a new start. This is a new beginning. And it's funny because this is the card where you have an offer for healing, or you have something coming to you, but you're ignoring it. You're at the tree like, okay, whatever. Like it's right there. This is the stuff that needs to heal. And this guy is like, nah. But when the reversal, it's kind of like, it's time now for a new start. It's time to acknowledge whatever's in that cup and to kind of move beyond it.
I'm having a crack in the armor is what's coming up for me. And is that
crack in armor?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's the only way to kind of let that in. Look at this. Temperance is reversed, which is out of balance, right? I mean, here's the healer. This is the healing card. Out of balance. It's like there's something here that's out of balance in the generation as a whole. Maybe that's discovered with that crack of armor once you start looking at it. It's almost like saying to the ladies, like, what wounds do we have? Maybe when you crack your armor and look, you might see what needs to be healed. I've got the Five of Wands here. Now, here we have the group and this conflict here. And this, I know this is weird, but I get competition. I get everyone trying to get to the top kind of thing. Is this energy of, how do I want to say it? Like I get the image of like it's Wall Street and like kill or be killed, or like I get this like sort of competition, but I'm also getting competition within the generation that has to be looked at. We have conflicts within our own collective. Not all Gen Xers have the same political beliefs or feelings. We might have similar wounds or collective experiences, but how we've reacted to those experiences are different and need to be acknowledged in some way. So it'll be interesting to see what you get from that. All right, here's my outcome card. And then I just want to pull a couple of oracle cards. All right, so the sun is reversed, which is interesting because to me, that's like the stuff that's out in the open. It's that revelation. But in the reversal, it's very eclipse energy.
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking about.
Yeah, like, and how would I like put that together? As I'm literally getting eclipse energy. To me, that's the shadow. It's the shadow.
Right.
The shadow over the shadows.
Right.
We got to do shadow work.
It's the deepest, it's the innermost, deepest, most difficult places to reach.
Yeah. The stuff we don't want to look at.
Right.
The stuff that's ugly, the stuff, and that could be in our own emotional makeup of how we may have reacted to something that we're looking at our shadow sides. That's what needs to happen. Let me just actually, I only want to use my Moonology Oracle cards. I want to pull 3 of those since we're in a full moon kind of day. And then hopefully you can riff off of this for your meditation. Shadow work. That's it. Look at that. New moon in Cancer. You and your loved ones are safe. But I'm getting that sort of eclipse kind of picture up there. Be bold and make the first move. So I think that what they're saying here is like, you're safe. Like, everybody's okay. This is the time for us to move out of ourselves, to crack that armor. And the final card, your commitment is being tested, which I think is interesting. Your commitment to the process. Oh my goodness. I kind of think of what we were just talking about our channels and the work we want to do, and how we need to commit to it, but we don't always commit to it. It's kind of like, no, this is your time. Like, it's time for you to really look at that. I saw that Earth Mama.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. Can I put that up for a second? Because I don't understand shadow work at all. To me, that is inviting bad juju. Can you I mean, I can say a few things.
So through this whole, through this entire conversation, we've been talking about collective woundedness. We've been talking about experiences as a generation, as a result of events happening around us that may have affected us in some adverse way. And we've been, proposing that abandonment is maybe one good way of understanding that shared collective woundedness as a generation. Shadow work is referring to is inner harms or pain that you have hidden away to not deal with it. So when we say shadow work, it's not shadow referring to evil spirits from the outside in the context that we're talking about here. We're talking about what we have buried, what our psyche has buried, because it happened in our youth, and for whatever reasons over the course of our lifetime, we have not found the space and the strength and the opportunity to release it, to see it and release it.
And see it, release it. And usually when you bring up something that you buried, something you didn't want to feel at the time because it really hurt, and if you acknowledge it and allow the crack in the armor, right, that emotion to show, and you put it out there for yourself, or even if you wrote it in a journal or you just acknowledge it in some way, it like releases something. And it's then that I don't know how to explain it, but your energy is just so much stronger.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think what you might be thinking of too, Earth Mama, when shadows go so deep and so unacknowledged through your lifetime to an extreme, yes, you can see people with very bad, I don't want to use the word evil, but it can be like evil behavior because of pain that is so deep and so traumatic and not acknowledged that people have chosen to do negative things. So maybe that's what you're feeling, but for the most of us, that's not the case. It's just about acknowledging our pain.
So I think we need to start by seeing the new moon in general is really about revelation. I use a tool in my practice I call the essence map. That's sort of a modern take on a medicine wheel. And on that map, I have the moon phases placed around the map, and the new moon is placed in the southwest. And in my spirit journeys, Carrie, in the southwest, there's a well that sits in the middle of a swamp. Believe it or not, there's an old well in a swamp, and this is the well of revelation. So it might be counterintuitive, but whenever there's a new moon, which is about shining the bright light of intuition on your truth, when I do my spirit journeys with a new moon, I take myself to this old stone well in the middle of a swamp.
Wow.
And look to see what I can draw from within the depths of that well. Because this is a moment when we can maybe allow ourselves to see those buried wounds and harms from a long, long time ago, those wounds and harms that we may not even recognize we have. So I want us to imagine being in that, standing about up to our knees in water, with a night sky above us. And oddly, in the middle of this swampland, there's an old stone well. And as we stand there under the bright moonlight, several feet from that old well, that old well of revelation and truth and knowing, we're now a little bit alarmed because we realize that we're sinking slowly into the mud in which we stand. And we can't approach the well to see into the well because we're weighed down by what we're wearing. We're standing in the middle of this swamp, covered in iron armor, holding a huge, heavy sword. Because we're strong and we're able, and we've fought our way, we've made our way to this place. We've been brave and courageous, we've been practical, and we've been resilient, and we find ourselves now slowly sinking in the mud and unable to approach the well of revelation until we put down the sword. We let the sword sink to the bottom of the swamp. What is that sword that you held? What is that skill? Maybe it's your quick wit, your sharp tongue. Something that has helped you survive and even thrive to this point in life. That's your sword. Put your sword down for now, just for now. And now we will take off the armor that we have hanging on our shoulders. Just reach up to your shoulders and lift off that heavy plate that's protecting you. As you lift it up, you see that there are several small cracks in that armor from struggles past. And bend down and let the armor sink into the water. So now you feel lighter. mobile. You're no longer sinking in the mud. And now you can take 3 steps forward to the edge of that well of revelation. And lean over to look down and see if you can see to the bottom. Deep down, you see the slight glint, the surface of the water at the bottom of the well, reflecting the moon above. And in this place, you are prepared to see, Gen Xer. Just for now, prepared to see and acknowledge, just to see and acknowledge that there is some inner woundedness. And maybe you can name it just quietly to yourself, name it to yourself now. We've suggested the ideas of abandonment or alienation, disillusionment. That may not serve you here. As you stand there in the moonlight, looking into the well of revelation, allow yourself to see and name quietly to yourself. What might that woundedness be? That deep woundedness that's been hiding beneath the surface, that holds you back from being the best middle-aged person, the best older adult, that might hold you back from being the best elder one day, until you can just name that woundedness, small or big, doesn't have to be dramatic. We'll take 7 breaths together, I'll count them, and ask you to name that woundedness to yourself. First breath, 1. Second breath, 2. Third breath, 3. 4. Name it quietly. 5. 6. 7, and name it one more time. It's just a beginning. The new moon is just the beginning. The full moon is just the beginning. The release, the seeing. You don't need to grapple with it right now. You don't need to try to heal it right now. You don't need to try to release anything right now. It's just to see it and to name it. Okay? That's the beginning. That's the beginning for my friend who left the comment for me on my video questioning, what are you talking about? Maybe one day soon she'll start to see, something inside of her that is left unattended. And maybe if she attends it, she can grow to be that wonderful old lady that she knows herself to be becoming. So if you need to do something like shaking your hands or moving your head or stretching in some way to come back All right, Carrie.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
I love Dan's meditations, so I can get it all out. So I want to thank you again for joining me, for the clarity that we brought to that question. I'm definitely going to have Dan on again after I get through my own transition this summer, because I love working with him. Please subscribe to his channel. It should be down below. And if you can like our conversation, that really helps the channel. Danny, do you have anything to add of what people need to do to connect with you, or some things that are coming up in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, no, mainly just encouraging people, like we said at the beginning, on the astrology point. The moon is a really great way to start if you want to get into astrology a little bit. Just tracking the moon's motions, and there's different apps you can use for that. DAF Moon is one I like to use, for example. And Carrie, I feel much more grounded and centered and calm now than I did at the beginning of this practice.
Yeah, same with me.
I have lots of ambition and desire to be of service to those like us, Carrie, who are willing and able and ready to, as I said, grow into the elders that we are destined to become. So I'm just anxious to know if I can be of service to anyone out there. That's it.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank the people in the chat, Sharon, Earth Mama, for your really good question, Ruth, and anyone else who is watching but just didn't chat. Thank you so much for joining us in our discussion.
Thank you.
I guess that's it.
Always be lighthearted.
Always.
You are not alone. Bye-bye.